For 11 seasons, one television show convinced America that comedy and grief could share the same room. MAS*H was never supposed to work the way it did. It began as a 1968 novel nobody expected to matter, became a 1970 film that broke every rule about how war could be shown on screen, and by 1972 had transformed into a CBS series that did something almost no sitcom had attempted before. It asked its audience to laugh and flinch in the same breath. But behind the iconic theme song and the operating room jokes, something else was happening, something the cameras never fully captured. One by one, the actors who built that world started disappearing from it. Some left quietly. One left through the most devastating plot twist network television had ever attempted. By the time the finale aired in 1983, 6 of the original core cast members were gone, each for a different reason, each carrying a different kind of weight. What really drove them away from one of the most beloved shows in television history? Let's find out. But before we get into what really happened behind the scenes, stay with us, because the full story is far messier, and far more human, than the reruns ever let on. MAS*H did not arrive as a guaranteed hit. Robert Altman's 1970 film had already proven that a war comedy with real surgical gore and overlapping dialogue could find an audience hungry for something less sanitized than the war stories television had offered before. When CBS adapted it into a series 2 years later, the network took an enormous risk. There was no laugh track in early cuts. There was real combat footage spliced between jokes about powdered eggs and bad coffee. The premise alone was strange for a sitcom, a mobile army surgical hospital during the Korean War, staffed by doctors who joked to survive what they saw on the operating table every day. What made it work was the ensemble. Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce became the emotional and comedic anchor almost immediately, a wisecracking surgeon whose humor masked a real moral seriousness underneath. But around him, a cast of equally compelling characters filled out the camp. Trapper John McIntyre, Hawkeye's partner in mischief, played by Wayne Rogers. Henry Blake, the bumbling but warm commanding officer, played by McLean Stevenson. Radar O'Reilly, the impossibly perceptive company clerk, played by Gary Berghoff, the only actor to carry his role over directly from the original film. Frank Burns, the insufferable self-righteous surgeon played by Larry Linville. Major Margaret Houlihan, introduced as a punchline and slowly built into something far more complicated, played by Loretta Swit. By its second and third seasons, MAS*H was not just a hit. It was a cultural fixture, drawing tens of millions of viewers weekly and winning critical respect that few sitcoms before it had managed to earn. But success on this scale created its own pressure. As Hawkeye's character absorbed more of the show's dramatic weight, the writers leaned further into Alda's range, and the rest of the ensemble began competing for screen time, story arcs, and creative relevance in a show that increasingly had room for only one true center. That imbalance, subtle at first, would become the quiet engine behind almost every departure that followed. The cracks did not appear all at once. They surfaced individually, each actor reaching a breaking point through a different door. McLean Stevenson was reportedly the first to feel it. Henry Blake's role, while beloved, had always been somewhat reactive, a steady warm presence rather than a driver of storylines. Stevenson, who had ambitions toward leading man stardom, began to chafe under a part that, however well loved, was not expanding the way his career hopes were. Insiders at the time noted growing friction between Stevenson and the writing staff over how much weight his character was being given relative to Alda's. Wayne Rogers carried a different grievance. His contract for the role of Trapper John had reportedly never been formally signed in the way he wanted, a structural issue that left him feeling expendable rather than essential, particularly as Hawkeye's storylines expanded and Trapper's contracted. Gary Berghoff's strain was the most personal of the group, rooted not in billing or screen time, but in his own escalating anxiety and the physical toll of being away from his family for long stretches of production. Larry Linville's discomfort was more creative than personal. He had built Frank Burns into one of television's great comic antagonists, but by his 4th season in the role, he began telling people privately that he felt he had nothing left to discover in the character. Each of these tensions was, on its own, survivable. Together, they were about to reshape the entire show. #Section 5, Second CTA. But this is only the beginning of what we uncovered, and what comes next changed the course of the entire series. Section 6, The Breaking Point. McLean Stevenson's exit became the first real rupture, and it remains one of the most talked about moments in television history. After negotiating his departure at the end of Season 3, Stevenson expected a conventional farewell, a transfer home, a happy ending for Henry Blake. Instead, the writers chose to end the episode Abyssinia, Henry with a gut punch nobody saw coming, a radio announcement that Blake's plane had been shot down over the Sea of Japan, with no survivors. The cast, many of whom learned the news in character as the scene was filmed, reacted with visible, unscripted shock. Audiences reacted the same way. It was one of the first times a network sitcom had killed off a beloved character with no warning and no comfort, and it generated a wave of public anger directed at CBS, with some viewers calling the decision needlessly cruel. For Stevenson, the fallout was complicated. He had wanted out, and he got out, but the death of Henry Blake closed the door on any future return, a door that several of his colleagues were later able to walk back through for guest appearances. His subsequent career, several sitcom attempts that never matched MAS*H's success, left him by his own later admission with regret, not over leaving exactly, but over how completely it severed him from something he never fully replicated again. Wayne Rogers' exit, by contrast, carried none of the spectacle and almost none of the closure. Where Stevenson's departure became a national television event, Rogers simply walked. The contract dispute that had been simmering since the show's early seasons never resolved to his satisfaction, and as Trapper John's storylines thinned in favor of Hawkeye's expanding arc, Rogers made the decision to leave at the close of Season 3, around the same time as Stevenson. There was no death, no dramatic farewell episode, no goodbye scene at all. Trapper John simply wasn't there when Season 4 began, his absence explained only in passing dialogue. For a character who had been half of the show's original comedic duo, the lack of any send-off remains one of the more quietly unsettling departures in the show's history, a reminder that not every exit gets to be a moment. Some exits are simply absences. What connects Stevenson's and Rogers' departures, and what would echo through the rest of the cast's exits over the following seasons, is a pattern that goes beyond any single contract dispute or creative disagreement. There are three systemic pressures running underneath nearly every actor's decision to leave. The first is the gravitational pull of a single lead character. As Hawkeye's arc deepened season over season, the show's writers, consciously or not, built increasingly around Alda's range, leaving supporting actors competing for diminishing space. A series built as a true ensemble had, by its third and fourth seasons, quietly become a vehicle with one undisputed center. The second is the physical and emotional cost of long-running production on actors who had not signed up for an 11-year commitment. Gary Berghoff's situation makes this most visible. He had played Radar since the original film, before the series even existed, and by the time the show entered its later seasons, the strain of years away from his family combined with mounting personal anxiety left him reportedly struggling on set in ways that went beyond ordinary burnout. His departure in 1979, dramatized across the two-part episode Goodbye Radar, was the gentlest of all 6 exits, a send-off built with visible care rather than shock value, allowing the character to return home to care for his ailing uncle. It remains one of the most tender farewells in the show's run, a deliberate contrast to the trauma of Henry Blake's exit 5 seasons earlier. The third pressure is creative exhaustion, a different kind of fatigue than Berghoff's. Larry Linville's departure falls squarely here. By 1977, after 5 seasons of playing Frank Burns as a one-note villain, Linville told producers he had taken the character as far as it could go without becoming repetitive. Unlike Stevenson and Rogers, Linville's exit was framed, both publicly and within the show's later storytelling, as a clean and even creatively liberating choice. Frank Burns left the 4077th to marry a general's daughter, and the writers used his absence to deepen Margaret Houlihan's character in ways Frank's overbearing presence had never allowed. But the most quietly significant departure of all was still ahead, the one actor whose exit didn't come from conflict at all, and what it revealed about the rest of the cast was something nobody had said out loud until much later. David Ogden Stiers, who joined the show in its 6th season as Major Charles Emerson Winchester III, became something rare in this story, the actor who stayed. He remained with MAS*H through its 11-season run, all the way to the 1983 finale, and his departure, when it finally came, was simply the natural end of the series itself rather than a personal exit forced by conflict, contract, or burnout. His arc resolved on the show's own terms, Winchester's pompous exterior slowly revealing real depth and vulnerability over the seasons, a transformation Stiers was given the time to build precisely because he never left. What makes Stiers' Storyland differently in hindsight is what came after the cameras stopped rolling. Years later, in an interview shortly before his death in 2018, Stiers publicly confirmed he was gay, a fact he had kept private for virtually his entire on-screen career, including the entirety of his time on MAS*H. He explained that he had felt unable to be open during the years the show aired, a quiet admission that reframed his steady, conflict-free tenure on the series in a more complicated light. The actor who never left, it turned out, had been carrying something the show itself never gave him room to address. Loretta Swit stands as the clearest counterpoint to every other name in this story. She is the only major original cast member who remained for the entire run without her character's purpose ever being questioned by the writer's room. What allowed her to stay wasn't the absence of pressure, it was what she did with the character she was given. Margaret Houlihan began as a punchline, a one-dimensional foil introduced largely to be the target of Hawkeye and Trapper's pranks. Swit pushed, repeatedly and deliberately, for the writers to deepen her, and over 11 seasons Houlihan evolved into one of the show's most fully realized characters, a transformation that gave Swit a reason to stay that none of her departing castmates ever found in their own roles. Today, MAS*H is remembered as one of the defining achievements of American television, but the story behind its cast tells a more complicated truth. The departures that once felt like disruptions, McLean Stevenson's shocking death, Wayne Rogers' silent exit, Gary Berghoff's emotional withdrawal, Larry Linville's clean break, are now understood as the very mechanism that kept the show evolving. Each loss forced the writers to reinvent the ensemble rather than repeat it, and the show arguably grew stronger with each transition rather than weaker. What's harder to reconcile is what happened to the actors themselves once they stepped away. Few of them found a role afterward that matched what MAS*H had given them, professionally or personally. Stevenson's later regret, Berghoff's quieter post-show life, even Linville's relatively peaceful exit, none of it translated into a second act on the same scale. Only Swit, who never left, and Stiers, whose private life remained hidden until decades later, carried something forward that the others didn't get the chance to. The bigger question the story leaves behind isn't really about a sitcom at all. It's about what it costs to be part of something larger than any single performer, and what's left of a person once the thing moves on without them. So which exit do you think was the most justified? Stevenson chasing a bigger spotlight, Rogers walking away from being underpaid and overlooked, or Berghoff stepping back to protect his own well-being? Do you think the show could have kept its original cast together if the writers had spread the spotlight differently? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below, because this conversation truly belongs to all of us. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives like this.